The first panel, the first discussion will be moderated by Shimon Riklin. It's difficult for me to describe him. He said I can't really give him a title. I don't know. He knows all about Twitter, Facebook. He's a columnist, loves Israel. Shimon Riklin, please, you are invited to come and moderate the first session. Why don't you start telling us what we can expect to other people who are participating in this panel, and we'll sort of be working around you. Good evening. And as Yifat said, I'm Shimon Riklin. I'm the political commentator of Channel 10. I just want to say thank you to Besheva, to Women in Green, Nadia Matar and Yudit. And when they talked to me, they said, please come. There is a fourth Sovereignty conference, and we'll talk about what can be done with the Arab population in the area. I thought there would be a few people, but you know what? I'm trying to see. I can't really see everybody, but this is a very impressive conference. There are hundreds of people here, so well done to you. And we will talk with Dr. Yoaz Hendel. We'll talk about with Dr. Diskin, with Caroline Glick. We will try and analyze what can we do with the Arab population. Because in recent months, if you've noticed, there's been a revolution. A number of weeks ago, whoever traveled in the Ayalon area, in the Dan area, you could see the notifications of the generals against annexation of any sort in Judea and Samaria. And many of my friends were really angry with these notifications and these notices, these bulletin boards, because they said, they're hypocritical. When Netanyahu, did such things, they said he wasn't acting properly, and yet they put up signs everywhere. Nobody calls them racist. Nobody said they are instilling fear. But on the way to the Barzel Street, which is in the northern part of Tel Aviv, when I crossed Ayalon, I saw these signs, and I was very happy for them, and I'll tell you why. Because this is the first time in many years now that the left is becoming defensive, that the left is investing millions to try and foil our ideas. That is something that we've never seen. And we usually would chase them. We usually say, no, this is no good. This solution won't bring peace, and this will bring about bloodshed, and don't give them weapons. And for the first time, they are running after us. And let me tell you the truth, much because of these two women here. It's much in their merit. And, at the beginning, we heard voices, oh, okay, they were considered to be marginal. But today, this is the central idea that is placed on the table. And the only question is how, when, and where. So if I may, I welcome upon Professor Diskin. Dr. Yoaz Hendel, Dr. Dror Eydar, and Caroline Glick, of course. And as I said before, we would like to discuss in this very short panel that we have the question about sovereignty. As far as this panel is concerned, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how we go about doing this. Let me begin with Dr. Yoaz Hendel, and he's on his way to San Francisco right now, so he might have to leave us a little earlier. But Yoaz, you talk about partial sovereignty. I would be happy if you can explain to us which areas are you talking about, and what do we do with the Arab population living in those areas? Okay, thank you so much, Shimon, and and thank you for those who organized this conference. I am one of those who believes that for many years, too many years, we knew how to say to everybody how they weren't good, they didn't act properly, and we always knew to say who we oppose and what not. It was much more difficult for us to say, and now we're actually marking 50 years to the Six-Day War. It was much more difficult for us to say what we do want. What we do want is a question that is supposed to be a question that's supposed to be in the very heart between left and right in a democratic state, you know, and there were all sorts of proposals: peace for territories, territories for peace, protest, building, and so forth. But this dispute, in many senses, has decomposed, has become superficial, and by means of this process, it was so much, you know, it was just more comfortable to disappear and not answer the question of what we do want. So 50 years later is enough time to be able to say what the state of Israel does want. And this is not connected at all to Netanyahu and Trump's meeting. It is an opportunity, it's potential for other things as well, because I'm not sure that this window of opportunity will remain open forever. But when we ask ourselves the questions what we do want, I think there has to be, at least we have to answer by building it on two different dimensions. There is this messianism, so to speak. It became this bad word. But, you know, messianism, so to speak, built this country. The thing is, what kind of messianism do we want? Is it a type of messianism that is rooted in heaven, or do we want one that is rooted in the ground? Messianism that is rooted in the ground can change, can move forward processes, can promote things. I think that the state of Israel has to define areas of consensus, or areas under consensus, areas of causes, value, or areas that are the red line. And these areas we have to start working on and try and help us apply sovereignty. Give us an example. What do you mean? Even the settlement blocks and the Jordan Valley are areas, I would say, that one can again create national consensus over, and we can explain why we have to be there as far as these areas are concerned. I think these areas can also, you know, instill logic, and be considered logical even with international players. But if we were to come to the US president and explain to him, Mr. President, you know, the Jordanians, their worst fear is to find a Palestinian state right there in the Jordan Valley, and that is why the Jordan Valley is a place of common interest to both of us. Now, the settlement blocks made no difference who the Prime Minister is. Even if it's Zahava Galon, we cannot evacuate this big settlement block. So let's start with that. And then there's so much more to do. Then we can dispute. But I think we need a more pragmatic approach, not to talk about things that are difficult to implement. It will be so much easier to explain. It does obligate us to say what would happen with areas A and areas B. What do we want of them? What do we wish to do with them? And what about those areas between the Jordan Valley and the big settlement blocks? We'll move to Caroline Glick now, and she has a somewhat different approach.
She takes a more maximal approach. Thank you very much. I'd like, first of all, to thank Nadia and Judith for the medal, and also for leading this entire initiative over the past years, and also for the friendship with them. So thank you very much for organizing these conferences and leading the camp on this crucial issue to the Jewish people. Regarding your question, I think that we need to dare and not to be afraid. What do I mean? I'm not talking about being surreal or being messianic. We have to realize there are difficulties in applying a vision, in realizing a vision. We haven't yet properly realized the vision of United Jerusalem, and that we'll talk about tomorrow at the other conference. And in principle, what we need to do is a number of things. First of all, at the first stage, I think that we do indeed need to we need to put away, shelf the idea, the law of applying sovereignty over Ma'ale Adumim and apply to all of Area C. I agree with Emmanuel Shilot's approach as he laid it out earlier. We don't know what will happen the next day after we apply sovereignty, and that's why we should grab as much as possible at the beginning. That's one thing. And another thing is, I think that we need to understand that we have responsibility towards the Arabs. We don't know how many there are. There is the phony census carried out in 1997 by the Palestinian Authority, and that census, in fact, is what created all those prophecies of doom regarding the demographics of the Jewish people in the land of Israel that were going to disappear. On the other hand, there is the census carried out by a private group of researchers and they proved that the census of the Palestinian Authority was phony. But there is no database that everyone can agree on. So it's very, very difficult to make decisions regarding where we're headed in terms of the Arab population in Judea and Samaria when we don't know exactly how many people are involved. The gap is more than a million, and we need to understand the trends of that population and where they're headed. And as long as the State of Israel and the government of Israel doesn't do a real proper census that we can all agree on regarding the number, almost all the discussions that we're holding them over one another's head without there being a common denominator regarding the facts. So what do you suggest doing? We talked about Area C. So there are a few tens of thousands of Arabs in Area C. What do you suggest doing with them? I think the rule that should guide Israel, as I wrote in my book regarding the Arabs, is that first of all they need to receive permanent residency, as the residents of the Golan Heights in East Jerusalem received after we applied Israeli law there. After that, we have to enable gradual naturalization based on the threshold conditions of the citizenship law. And we need to look at it and see what are the criteria for naturalization in Israel. And the third thing that we need to understand is that if there is a single law for everyone, then we need to enforce that law equally to all, towards Arabs, just as we enforce the law for Israelis in everything where incitement is concerned, construction, taxation, everything. And every penalty and every reward that the citizens of Israel have should apply equally to all. And once again, regarding the stages or phases of naturalization, we must have a proper database regarding the numbers, one that we can all agree on regarding how many people are involved. But there is no doubt that the Arabs who are residents of Area C must receive permanent residency, and they must be enabled to apply for Israeli citizenship. And if they meet the threshold conditions of Israeli citizenship, then they should be granted Israeli citizenship. Thank you. Professor Diskin. You hear Dr. Yoaz Hendel and you hear Caroline Glick. In your opinion, do you think the directions they are pointing to are feasible? I don't know. The only thing I can say is that I don't know. Perhaps you don't want to hear what I have to say. I was asked what I think about the directions or solutions. We haven't heard full solutions. We've heard directions that have been proposed here, and they were also voiced by previous speakers, and I have to say that I don't know. I really don't know what needs to be, and I'd like to tell you a story. I come from a completely different direction than most of the people in this room. And a short time after the Six-Day War, I was already 20 years old, but I was very, very young. And I heard a lecture from a guest lecturer in the Hebrew University. It was Levi Eshkol, the prime minister at the time. And he spoke about the various options. And over the years, by the way, I learned directly from Yuval Ne'eman, who wasn't given any role in the war headquarters during the war, and Moshe Dayan said to him, mark out those areas, strips of land where Arabs don't live. The concept of Palestinians didn't exist yet, or wasn't common yet. And there was Yigal Allon had his solution, a security solution, including the Jordan Valley, and there was the demographic issue. So there were all kinds of ideas in the air. But the line taken by the State of Israel was the Jordanian option. So Eshkol spoke, and he spoke about that subject, among other things. And then with great trepidation, I raised a trembling finger, and who am I to ask? And I asked him, why don't you think about a Palestinian option? Why don't you think about the option of establishing a Palestinian state? And contrary to what Tzipi Chotovely said, I think that history begins long before the last 25 years. 80 years ago, there was a Peel Commission that all the Jewish leadership, not all, but most of it, accepted the Peel plan in much worse borders than the partition plan. They said, okay, Peel plus the Negev. And then we also got the partition plan. And in 1968, we're talking about 1968, we already had a very serious refugee problem. And I thought that is consistent with the position of the leadership of the Jewish community in pre-state Israel for so many years. And this was also an option to resolve the refugee problem, which in terms of demographics is nothing like the situation today, when it's much, much worse. Eshkol did not answer my question. He collected some questions and he answered the ones he wanted to answer, and he ignored my question. When he was on the way out, he stopped in front of me and he said something that remains engraved eternally in my memory. He said, as he used to talk to people my age, he said, "Junger man, young man, I wish we could do what you want to do." Now, I say to you that Eshkol was a very wise man, and he knew what it took a long time for me to understand. And one of the things that he knew was that there was no chance of true peace, no chance of true peace. By the way, the states with whom we have peace agreements, there is a reasonable equilibrium with them. They do not recognize the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state in the land of Israel. And the Palestinians, we don't have to talk. Let's say there is the first charter, the second charter. The first terrorist activity was carried out by Fatah, the leading organization in the PLO, which took over PLO on January 1st, 1965. It has nothing to do with the settlements or anything of that nature. And the language of the charter is unequivocal. There is no room not for a Jewish state, but even for Jews in the state of Israel, unless they came before the Zionist invasion. I can benefit from the doubt because I'm fourth generation on my father's side, but on my mother's side, I came after the Zionist invasion, and all those who came after the Zionist invasion, let's not delude ourselves. So if so, Professor Diskin, so why don't you agree with what Caroline said? We have a lot of balls in the air right now, and I can tell you, for example, something that people don't think of. The moment you do something unilateral that is extreme, the more extreme that size is, the more you advance the possibility of the establishment of a Palestinian state. And let me explain why. What happens today is that the whole world is pressuring Israel, and the Palestinians refuse to sit down and talk to us. And we all know that Netanyahu agreed to freeze construction in 2009 for 10 months in order so that they would agree to talk to us, and they didn't. So the whole world believes that it's the settlers, and by the way, things are done that shouldn't be done, but perhaps a handful, let's say, of people, things that are harmful to the settlements and to the people of Israel and the state of Israel. But the world as a whole believes that the pressure should be applied to Israel, and the way to advance, I don't believe in a Palestinian state, but if there were any way to establish a Palestinian state, it would be to pressure the Palestinians. Because today they have nothing to lose. They are living in the belief that we will go in the way of the Crusaders. It took 100 years, 200 years, and they say it explicitly. They are patient. They're willing to wait. They don't have a problem. They can wait, and the whole world has bought their narrative. We are defeated in the world. And the moment you take a unilateral step, then you are pressuring them, and you are also harming Israel's shaky position in the world, and then they won't believe you that there's no possibility of a peace agreement. That's why I say I don't know. But let me say in general terms, if we have let me just say one more thing. The right way is always to look for the balance, the point of equilibrium, which is the best one, first of all, for the Jews in the state of Israel. First of all. But maybe it's good for the Arabs too. But it's dependent on military affairs, on international pressure, on demographic matters. Caroline once mentioned that she was my student at one time. You mentioned it at a wedding, if you recall, a certain wedding. We were at the wedding of a common friend. You remember? And I'm happy that she learned one thing, that you have to base yourself on facts. We don't know the facts. We don't know the facts. So what you need to do is to maneuver and to keep all the balls in the air. And the truth is that we're doing it not bad at all. Look what happened in Judea and Samaria over the past 50 years. It's not a failure. They may say to you that's part of the evolution, and the next stage will be applying sovereignty. Let's hear from Dr. Dror Eydar. I recently have written quite a few articles that talk about applying partial sovereignty. I spoke to someone in the media not to use the word annexation because it sounds like a disease, but to talk about applying sovereignty. We are the ones to whom this land belongs, aren't we? And nevertheless, I speak to Caroline and I speak to Yoaz as well, and I'd like to say that I didn't feel comfortable about the idea of applying sovereignty only to Area C, but I wrote it, I said it in order to apply pressure to the right, in order to make a compliment. So let me tell you what my philosophy is, and here I can connect somehow to what Professor Diskin said, but from a different direction. We are involved in a long-term historic process. The pendulum, the historic pendulum of the Jewish people has changed. It changed about 250 years ago. At first, we returned to history in order, during the Enlightenment period, and then when we were disappointed by that process, we realized that we had to come home, and then, like Sleeping Beauty, our nationalism awoke. And we returned here, and we're talking about a very long process. In the beginning, very, very few came. And within that process, our relationship with Israel is a reflection of our relationship to our identity. Who returned to history? What nation returned to history? What people? Those who read the texts, the Jewish texts from the Bible, through the Talmud and the Midrash and the Apocrypha and the Zohar and Chassidut and the Enlightenment and the Revival period. We are a people that lives in text. So who came back? Those people from Mea Sha'arim, from Merkaz Arav, or the people from Yeshivat Hebron, the Geri Hasidim. What type of people returned? We are still in a process of consolidation, and the land is a sign behind which has. And it brings us back to our tradition and the God. We are not consolidated. Over years, we fought with God, like Jacob. And to say nothing of Moses, there was no consensus about him either, and so on and so forth. We're constantly deliberating about our identity, and our relationship with the land is connected to that problem with our identity. Until we've decided who we are, the land also responds in the same way. And because that is how it is, our desire to force historical processes to take place is like Peace Now. We are trying to force, it's part of the hubris of the Israeli left, who thought that it could, in 1972, force its solutions on Israel. We are in a region which is the cradle of human civilization, and here there's a different perception of time and of what a solution is. A song in the West is 3 minutes long. How long is a song in the Arab countries in the Middle East? 30 minutes. It's a different perception of time. It's a perception, the perception of place is also different. The perception of earth. In the Bible, the word Adam, person, comes from the word Adama, earth, which is why you have to spill blood, dam, for it. We think we've come from the West, and we're trying to consolidate our identity. And that's why we need to be patient. If we knew, if I were to say to you that in 100 years' time, with God's help, in another 100 years, in Judea and Samaria there would be 3 million Jews, and it would be entirely ours, without all those issues of the Palestinian Authority and autonomy and I don't know what. Would you accept that? There's no time, says someone from the audience. You're right. That's the argument. The argument is not over the goal. The argument is over the time. Who has patience and who doesn't have patience? How old are we as a nation? Since the tribes of Israel crossed the Jordan, we're talking about the 13th century BCE, at least 3,200 years. A person lives, say, 80 years. If we divide 3,200 years into 80 years, we're talking for every year, human year, 40 years of a nation. So we're talking about the state of Israel is a baby that's a year and a half old. And since the Bar Kokhba rebellion, his barren parents have been waiting for its birth. And because we are now, I'm talking to an elite that is taking shape right now. And as I said to the pioneers in Amona, we don't have anyone now to look at and say it's your fault. The state now is on our shoulders. We are now the elite that is in the making. And an elite in the making needs to have compassion for the public. The vast majority of the public is not ideological. They support the settlement. They support the pioneers. But on the other hand, I once heard Rabbi Livinger in '88, and then there was still the Jordanian option. And he said, if Hussein, I recall it word by word, if Hussein were come to go shopping in Diskin Center, 110 Knesset members would vote for him. And so that's why we need compassion for the people and not to force things that may upset the balance and cause the opposite reaction. We must be patient. If we know how to draw out of the current situation more homes, even within the blue line, we can double the population to 1 million in 10 years, and then it would be good. We don't have to do everything at once. And regarding your question, sir, as I see it, we have a lot of time, a lot of time. Where were we 70 years ago, and where are we today? If 70 years ago my wife's grandmother was in Auschwitz, and now we have more than 8 million people here in Israel, imagine where we'll be in another 100 years. Patience and faith. Thank you to Dr. Dror. Eydar, you presented your philosophies here, and Nadia and Yudit didn't say this to me, but I think the audience also wants to hear about practical steps. Let's say we're talking about sovereignty and it's going in the right direction. We see the surveys and we see the support, but no steps have been taken like establishing a committee or what Caroline said. No practical steps have been taken.
Professor Diskin שלו.
I'd be happy to hear from all of you, including Professor Diskin. We don't have very much time, and that's why I asked Dr. Eydar to cut his remarks short. We understood the direction. What do we do tomorrow morning in order to advance this important idea?
As far as I'm concerned, I think the most important thing from this conference is not only dreaming about applying sovereignty, but also bringing back one word that characterizes Israelis is to talk tachlis, to be practical. And I think we have to really convince ourselves fully. And, you know, politicians can stand here, they can make all sorts of statements, but then there could be nothing real. And, maybe we don't even agree, even the person who just applauded from it. There's nothing real here because the biggest lie is the status quo. Take the map of Israel from the past 50 years. You'll see that the lines keep changing. We gave up Sinai, the Gaza Strip, NB's 40% of the territories. I remember the protests again. Do you know who holds the Palestinian Authority? We do. The State of Israel, the right-wing government. Nobody should tell you stories that we are opposed to the Palestinian Authority. But when we place everything on the table, we have to ask ourselves, what is our interest and how can we convey our message? I want to go back to what I said. Just in a nutshell, Shimon, let me say as follows. As far as I'm concerned, Zionism is a practical business. Judah the Maccabite understood that to live here, to establish a kingdom here, you have to sign a contract with Rome. Ben-Gurion understood we need the other nations. And everything we do, every process that we want to do, it has to be as practical as possible. What can we do? We can talk about what kind of points we can explain to the world in which situation there will never be a Palestinian state. You're talking about the blocks, for example, yes. The big blocks or Jordan Valley. You can also explain why the Bar-Ilan speech is no longer valid because 3 countries talking about the Gaza Strip, and you can also explain what we wish to do with territories A and B, and to place the things on the table, not to just let them hover up in there, and to say what our interest is to have A and B. I think it is an Israeli interest. Thank you. You ask Caroline, please. The first thing that we have to do is to know how many Palestinians there are. But before that, if you're talking about public diplomacy, the first thing we have to do is we no longer support the establishment of a Palestinian state. It makes no difference at the end how people will respond, how Muslim will respond, and his team will respond. So long the government policy is to establish a Palestinian state, we cannot explain ourselves or to anybody else. So long that is the policy of the State of Israel or that of the Prime Minister, there is nothing practical that we can do. So the first thing that we have to do is to, for once and for all, say that we do not know, that we no longer support the establishment of a Palestinian state. The second thing we have to do is find out how many Palestinians there are in Judea and Samaria. In 2007, I wrote an article in the commentary, and also a series of articles in the Israeli press that I wrote, that we have to first apply sovereignty on the settlement blocks. And we can say this is an application program for 10 years. We'll see what will happen with the Palestinians after 10 years. If they want peace, we might talk with them. If not, they're not. If we don't want, we will expand the settlement blocks, over which we apply sovereignty. Today, I think it's no longer relevant. And the last thing that I wish to say to you, Dror, it is true. You know, the question here is a question of time, and the eternal nation is not afraid of a very long journey. But we have to also understand that so long we keep conveying this, the message, and if we don't talk about our rights over the land of Israel and the fact that it all belongs to us, we are losing the debate. We are losing international acknowledgement. The more clear-cut we talk, unequivocally, without stuttering, and not hesitantly, that we want everything, then we will find ourselves in a much more secure position in the short term, in the middle range, for the long term. No matter what the borders are, and I'm actually all for applying sovereignty over all of Judea and Samaria and taking responsibility for the entire land. Thank you so much. Thank you, Caroline. Professor Diskin, and just leave some time for Dror as well. First, I would like to say, just pay note that I think there is a disillusionment among the left and among the Israelis in general. You know, in the past, people used to blame the settlers for everything, including the moderate left proposed peace and security. Today, people know we are not the ones at fault, and this was said as well. Okay, we don't want peace, we want a political agreement. And so now we're no longer saying a political arrangement, but there is a demographic problem, and as was said, we don't really know what the scope of it is, but we know it exists. So maybe we should do this unilaterally. We should just, remove ourselves from those territories. We already did it in one place, and again, you can dispute the results of that evacuation. But let me just say, just remember that we are living in the Middle East. The Middle East is a volcano of sorts that does not stop erupting these very days. And sometimes when I have good dreams, I think about the Jordanian option. And the Jordanian option can again be implemented in all sorts of ways if Jordan continues to exist. That is, if I may quote one righteous person, George Chabash, who used to say that the way to Jerusalem passes through Amman. Let me just describe you that if there is a demographic problem with the Palestinians, it's a Jordanian problem. It is not our problem. And that is why maybe the controller will be a Hashemite. The George Chabash can no longer be the ruler, but somebody of his kind. And of course, this reshuffles the cards. And that is why if we take any step, it doesn't mean anything. But we do have to remember that these possibilities are not just imaginary. They are more realistic than peace and security, and that the settlers are manifestation of all evil. Thank you, Professor Diskin. I agree that we have to rid ourselves not only of a Palestinian state. I think the role of intellectuals, and again the right Again, we don't have research centers, unfortunately, no serious research center that can raise a next generation of intellectuals. Rotem Sela is trying to do something. Just compare it to all the institutes of the left and the faculties in the universities and so forth. I think our role at the end of the day is not the territory. It's not the territory that determines everything. It's also awareness. And for years we kept dealt with territory, another hill, another hill. But we neglected that intellectual arena. We left it to the left. And our role is to save again those values, take them take them out of that prison where they are imprisoned. What is occupation? Where is their occupation? What is a state, a non-state, autonomy? What is land? What is demolition, and so forth? I think we have to not act as those that after us the flood. By the way, I don't agree that Arabs have the patience. No, they have no choice. If they were able to, they would slaughter all of us. It's not that they have patience. If they could, they would slaughter all of us. We have patience because we are a very old nation. We're an ancient nation. And if we were to listen to ourselves and remember that we are part of a very long process, we don't have to finish the job, but we're of course not at liberty to not do anything. We can leave something for the next generation as well. And if we do that, we will be successful in achieving more than we imagine today we're able to achieve. But we have to be patient. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Dr. Yoaz, Dr. Professor Diskin, Glick, and Dror. Eydar. Thank you so much. Good evening. Hopefully next year we will see some sort of progress. Thank you so much, Shimon Riklin, the political commentator of Channel 20.